Good afternoon. We're back with another Lord of the Rings LCG video, and today we'll be going over the Gondor deck archetype. We'll be going over what I consider to be staples of the deck, the general purpose of the deck, how it's meant to be played, and what it's trying to do, and we're going to go over different cards in the deck and which ones are essential and which ones can be swapped out if you don't have them but you want to play the deck still. I've got two variants of the Gondor deck here. One is a Monosphere leadership deck, and one is an Aristor Swarm deck. In each case, these decks were inspired by other decks. I'll have the links to these decks in the information section, and you can check out the decks and the decks that inspired these decks. In one case, the Gondor Swarm deck was inspired by Seastan, and the Brothers of Gondor deck was inspired by Wingfoot Ranger. So thanks to those players for building these decks. I like them a lot. And I made a few modifications to suit my own personal choices or playstyle. So first we'll talk about the deck on the right here, the Gondor Swarm deck. The Gondor Swarm deck plays a little similar to the Outlands deck that I've played frequently on my channel. The core of it is Boromir. Boromir is going to be in my opinion, a must include in any Gondor deck. Boromir, leadership Boromir from the Heirs of Numenor expansion. He has 1, 3, 2, 5 stats, which are not that great for questing, and honestly not that great for combat either. But while he has at least one resource in his resource pool, Gondor allies get +1 attack. So, playing a Gondor deck without Boromir, you can do it. I think it's much worse than the one with Boromir. Leadership Denethor. He's very good for a swarm deck. He's a good defender with 3 shields. He starts with 2 resources on him. He has the ability to move 1 resource from his resource pool to another Gondor hero's resource pool. That synergizes with Boromir, helping him to always keep 1 resource in his resource pool so that the Gondor allies can get +1 attack. He's not essential. You can play the Gondor deck without Denethor, and it will still be playable. It won't be as good, but it will still be playable. The Gondor Swarm deck gets a lot worse without Denethor. The Swarm deck really wants to start with Denethor's extra 2 resources that he starts with on setup. So if you don't have leadership Denethor, you could swap in almost any other hero from this sphere without much problem. It might be a little worse, depending on which hero you swap in, it might be a little worse in some cases, it might even be a little better in some cases. To play the deck as it's designed, you probably want a leadership hero with as much defense as possible, because that is the role that Denethor fulfills in the deck. Just about anybody would do, though. Aragorn from the core set would be a perfectly fine alternative. Let's talk about the allies in the deck. First of all, you're going to want Faramir, unless you're playing him as a hero. Faramir is my favorite ally in the entire game. I use him in nearly every deck. Definitely will want Faramir. Citadel Custodian, also from Heirs of Numenor, along with Boromir. Lowers the cost to play by 1 for each Gondor ally in play, so this is a bad card if you play it for 5 cost. It is a very good card if you play it for 1 or for 0, so you really need 4 Gondor allies on the table to make this good. Not a good early game card, but in a swarm deck, you will be able to take advantage of this ability at least some of the time. Not an essential card, though. We'll go over alternatives after I go over the allies. Envoy of Pelargir, also from Heirs of Numenor. Well, if you're playing Boromir, and you probably will be if you're playing Gondor, then you'll be playing Citadel Custodian and Envoy of Pelargir as well. as they're from the same expansion, along with Errand Rider. Those 3 cards all from the Heirs of Numenor expansion, and they synergize to a certain extent, allowing you to move resources around to make sure you always have one on Boromir, so that your Gondor allies get +1 attack. Herald of Anorion, you have the option of giving it Doomed 2 when you play it from hand. If you do, it gains. After you play Herald of Anorion, choose a player. That player may put into play 1 ally from his hand with a printed cost of 2 or lower. So he helps you to swarm the board with cheap allies. We've got a number of allies with 2 costs or less. Ioreth is a healer, a Gondor healer, along with Warden of Healing. If you don't have either Warden of Healing or Ioreth, you could remove the 2 Wardens of Healing and add in Ioreth. So you could remove the Ioreth and add another Warden of Healing, no problem. They're simply there to provide some healing, and they synergize with Gondor. Ioreth can't attack or defend, so she can't take advantage of Boromir's ability. But I think Ioreth is such a good card that I think it's worth including 1. Knight of the White Tower. This is probably my favorite Gondor ally. It's just a big body that you put on the table. Resources all have to come from a single hero's resource pool, but with this deck's ability to move resources around with Envoy of Pelargir, Errand Rider, Denethor, not too big a deal, that downside. Pelargir Ship Captain. After Pelargir Ship Captain enters play, move 1 resource from the resource pool of a hero you control to another hero's resource pool. This isn't very important. It's redundant with a lot of other cards in the deck, but it is a Gondor ally. And it's included mostly for that reason. Soldier of Gondor. After Soldier of Gondor enters play, search the top 5 cards of your deck for a Gondor ally and add it to your hand. Any number of Gondor allies instead if your threat is 40 or higher. I like that card a lot for a Gondor Swarm deck. Helps you get some card draw. Continue swarming the board. It's cheap, works with Herald of Anorion. It's from the Wrath and Ruin Adventure Pack. Squire of the Citadel. After Squire of the Citadel leaves play, add 1 resource to a Gondor hero's resource pool. This is a chump blocker. That is its only purpose. It is functionally not that much different from like a feint. Although it does, in some cases it'll be worse, but in some cases it'll be a little better, and it'll have 1 attack with Boromir while you're waiting for something to attack it. Veteran of Osgiliath. Veteran of Osgiliath gets +1/+1/+1 while your threat is 40 or higher. It's another good, decently big body when your threat gets up there. So there's multiple cards in this deck that want you to have 40 threat or higher. And then the Warden of Healing. So the attachments, Heir of Mardil. After attached hero gains any number of resources from a card effect exhausted to ready attached hero. This synergizes with Steward of Gondor. So you'll put Steward of Gondor on Boromir, and Heir of Mardil will allow him to ready. This will mean you'll want to use Steward of Gondor after Boromir's been exhausted and not during the resource phase. Visionary Leadership. This is absolutely, positively essential, in my opinion, in order to play the Gondor deck. You have to have, in my opinion, you have to have Leadership Boromir, the hero, and you have to have Visionary Leadership from the Morgul Vale. While attached hero has at least 1 resource in its resource pool, Gondor characters get +1 willpower. All of these characters are pretty weak on willpower. Faramir helps with that, but other than that, this deck is virtually unplayable in solo without Visionary Leadership. Or at least it's extremely reliant on Faramir. without Visionary Leadership. So you gotta have Boromir and you gotta have Visionary Leadership. Very good Tail is very helpful in a swarm deck for getting out allies quickly. Captain's Wisdom adds additional resources, and Heed the Dream is helpful for looking through the deck to grab. Probably Faramir or Visionary Leadership are going to be your top targets for Heed the Dream, depending on which one you can afford. The point of this deck is to get as many allies on the board as quickly as possible, get set up with Visionary Leadership and Faramir for questing, and use Boromir and the ally swarm for attack. You'll use Denethor for defense along with Knight of the White Tower. So where is this deck strong? It provides a lot of attack power, and it can do so very quickly. Where is it weak? You're extremely reliant on Faramir and Visionary Leadership for willpower. If you don't get one of those, you're going to be very weak on willpower, especially early. Boromir's only got one, Denethor's only got one, Aristor's only got two. If you don't get Visionary Leadership or Faramir within a couple of turns, you're going to be hurting for willpower quite a bit, and therefore this deck is not good, especially in solo play, against quests that have a willpower wall for you to get over in the beginning of the game. There are, especially in Nightmare mode, a number that will expect you to quest for as much as 10 or 11 in round 1, and Gondor Swarm just isn't going to do that. It's a fun deck to play, especially in multiplayer, if you want to play it in combination with another deck that's strong in willpower, but it's going to be weak in solo play against any quest that has got a willpower wall for you to get over in the beginning. But it's a fun and pretty thematic deck, and it can provide a lot of attack power. The variant on the left side has no Aristor and instead includes Hero Leadership Faramir after you engage an enemy, ready an ally you control. That is synergistic with the ally swarm. Also playing in this deck, Angbor the Fearless, a Gondor ally who also benefits from having 40 threat or higher when he gets +2 attack and does not exhaust a quest when that's the case. Very strong ally for a Gondor deck. Got ally Angbor, leadership version. After an enemy is added to the staging area, exhaust, or not Angbor, Anborn. Exhaust Anborn to give that enemy +5 engagement cost until the end of the round. Then deal 1 damage to that enemy. It's not an essential card. It's a decent card. It's a fun card. It's expensive. It provides a lot of attack, especially with Boromir, and some combat ability, but that doesn't really do much to cover the weaknesses of Gondor, which is to some extent defense. For defense, you have White of the Night Towers, but you don't have any way to get any of your allies or heroes to 4 defense. And 4 is an important number, so you're really going to need the healing. And likely going to need a number of chump blockers, and you may be running on fumes by the end of some long quests. This deck also, on the left, also runs Rod of the Steward. Attached to a Gondor hero, spend 2 resources from attached hero's resource pool to draw 1 card. So that will go on your Steward of Gondor target and allows you to get out your allies quicker. It's an important card to have when you're not running Aristor. Aristor draws you 3 additional cards at the beginning of the resource phase. You won't have that in the Brothers deck, so you run the Rod of Steward for card draw. Sword of Numenor, attached hero gets +1 attack after attached hero participates in an attack that destroys an enemy with 5 or more hit points. Exhaust Sword of Numenor to add 1 resource to attached hero's resource pool. You can play more than one of these. You could even play 2 on the same hero. And if you do attack some 5 attack enemies, which are pretty common in Nightmare quests or harder difficulty quests, you could add 1 or 2 or even 3 resources to your heroes. Only 2 per hero, but still that's a good resource generation card. And then, as this is a Monosphere leadership deck, we also have Strength of Arms. Play only if each hero you control has a printed leadership resource icon ready each ally in play. That's a very good card in a Swarm deck and is a strong reason to play Monosphere leadership. Now, leadership Faramir, he's decent, but the fact that you can't play ally Faramir downgrades the questing potential of this deck quite a bit, and that is very important because the deck is already weak on questing. If you wanted to play a variant without leadership Faramir so that you could run ally Faramir, I would probably swap in Aragorn. Aragorn seems like a very good option from the core set. And then you could swap out one of these Gondor allies, probably like Anborn for, and then maybe even one Angbor for 3 copies of ally Faramir. That's probably the better version of the deck, though it's less thematic with the 2 brothers Faramir, Boromir, and their father Denethor. But the version without hero Faramir and with ally Faramir would be stronger. Overall, this is a fun archetype to play, but if you're thinking about picking up the cards to get it, don't expect it to be overpowered. It'll be fun. It's not going to be the key to defeating quests that you've never been able to beat before. But it's fun and it's thematic. So let's go over alternatives. If you should not have some of these cards, but you still want to play a Gondor deck, one option will be, if you're playing the version with Aristor, could be the card Mablung from the Land of Shadow. He's a 2 willpower ally with 1 attack, and he has an ability which I haven't gotten much use out of. But the 2 willpower for 2 attack for 2 cost is nice. He'll have 2 attack as well with Boromir. This is a pretty good ally if you're running Aristor in your Gondor deck. And I would take a strong look at him, a good hard look at him, because if you have him, because he's an excellent alternative to any of the allies you don't have. And we'll get into allies that are, well, let's say less strong, but nonetheless worth considering if you don't have some of the cards in the deck list. Emin Arnin Ranger. Pretty weak stats. After he commits to the quest, choose an enemy with a trap attachment until the end of the phase. So it's really bad if you don't have traps, and it's obviously not playable in the Monosphere deck, but it is a Gondor character and could be used just for the sake of filling out the deck with all Gondor characters. Hunter of Lamadon, it's a very weak card, but it is Gondor, and it does have 1 willpower, 1 attack, and 1 shield, so it's playable as an alternative to other allies that you don't have. Ithilien Tracker. Weak stats, but it's got the ability to lower the threat of the next enemy added to the staging area to 0. I think it's playable as an alternative. It makes the deck weaker, but it is playable as an alternative if you just want to fill out the deck with Gondor cards and you don't have some of the cards listed. That's a lore card and is only going to be playable in the Aristor version. Master of Lore. Exhaust to name a card type, lower the cost for you to play the next lore card of that type by 1. Only going to be usable if you're playing some of the lore Gondor allies and you have Aristor. It's from the Heirs of Numenor expansion, so it may be an option if you don't have some of the other allies. Anborn, there's two versions of him, one from Blood of Gondor, and it is a lore version. That's a trap card, though it is still playable as a replacement for other things. And then you also have Anborn from the Land of Shadow. It's stronger than his lore option, his lore alternative, unless you're playing traps. And he's not bad. He'll provide 4 attack with Boromir. That's pretty strong. He does cost a lot, though. Also provides a little bit of crowd control, let's call it. Ithilien Lookout from the Dunland Trap. That is another lore card. It's a secrecy card, but it's still playable. It'll give you 3 attack for 3 cost with Boromir. And after it enters play, you can look at the top card of the encounter deck and you have the option of discarding it. In gold, that is a Wastes of Eriador card. Gets +1 willpower for each hero you control with at least 1 resource in its resource pool. That can really help with the deck's willpower struggles if you have this card. And you're willing to do a little bit of resource management. His ability is not always going to give him 3 willpower, but you can often get 2 or 1. So he'll be a decent, though somewhat inconsistent option. Guardian of Ithilien. Another lore card. Only costs 1. He'd be 2 attack with Boromir. After he enters play, return an enemy engaged with you to the staging area. Not bad. Not a bad option for a swarm deck if you're playing Aristor and you don't have some of the other cards. And last but not least, we have White Tower Watchman from the Druidan Forest. It's if each hero you control belongs to the same sphere of influence, you may assign damage from undefended enemy attacks to White Tower Watchman instead of a hero you control. That can be important in certain quests. In a lot of quests, though, it's not really going to be doing any good. And it'll likely just serve as a jump blocker or maybe quest for a little bit. He doesn't have to be ready, though, in order to do that, so you can quest for 1 or 2 with Visionary Leadership or even 3 with Faramir. Allow you to commit all of your heroes to the quest if you want to, and then still have the ability to have them survive from an undefended attack. So, hopefully that gives players a better idea of how to construct a Gondor deck, what you can expect from a Gondor deck. If you want to play the Monosphere leadership version, there aren't a lot of alternatives in the leadership sphere for Gondor allies. If you play the Swarm version with Aristor, there are some options for alternatives for allies. They're not great options. They'll downgrade the power of the deck a little bit, but it'll be playable if you just want to play a Gondor deck, a Gondor Swarm deck. So I'll be going over other deck archetypes as well. Dunedain, Dane, possibly creatures with Radagast, things like that. Hopefully this is helpful, if not at least entertaining. And thank you for watching.